Brody, and I want to welcome all of you and thank all of you for coming out on a day which looked a little bit threatening, and it is awfully cold, so we appreciate people coming out. It was kind enough to clear up for us in time, so someone is looking down on us. So we thank you for joining us. We are the Gray Hawk Memoir Writers. We are here, basically our first public event to launch our book yesterday's, Memoirs from the Gray Hawk Writers. We are very appreciative to Prairie Lights Bookstore, this wonderful community institution we have, for hosting us here today, allowing us to do this. It's so fantastic. We also want to thank the Public Access TV who are in the back, and Joshua Edmonds, who's there, for taking time out on his Sunday and coming over to do this for us. The Gray Hawks go back to 1999. As I hear the story, the late Sam Becker, who was head of the Retirees Association, UI Retirees Association, challenged the members that year, say, don't just retire and go sit down, do something. And one of the things, a group took up the challenge of writing their memoirs. They said, let's form a group, and they formed that group. We had our 15th anniversary this year. I shouldn't say we because I'm a latecomer, but we still have 4 or 5 from the original group in 1999. Others have retired or stopped coming regularly. A few have passed away, and but the group goes on and has been really helped by John Hudson, who's kind of the organizer, timekeeper, and keeps after us. The history of our book is a little bit funny. I joined in 2007, and sometime, I think that year or the next, we used to host our meetings at a different person's home every 2 weeks. And we hosted at our house, and my wife was busy in the kitchen, but she has very, very sharp hearing. I can never get away with anything. And so she was listening to everything, and afterwards, and then serving her lovely food as usual, and then afterwards she said, your group has to put out a book. These things I heard are wonderful. Those should not just be around your group. And I said, oh, that's a terrific idea. So I mistakenly shared that idea with the group 2 weeks later. And I say mistakenly because I know better from a lifetime of these things that when you go into a group with a fantastic idea like that, and especially if you're, at the time I was the youngest one in the group, you know what the result is going to be. They're going to say, that's a terrific idea. You be the editor and move forward with this. And it only took us 6 or 7 years to finally get it out. It started, it stopped, it started, it stopped. I have to give a lot of credit. We had a committee at one time, and I have to give credit to Mildred particularly, because she said, you have to do this, we have to do this, and invited a new committee to come over, and I think Mike was on it. I forget if Bob was, and John and Sandra Hudson, and it eventually came out with a lot of effort and work. It's entirely homegrown in the sense, apart from the printer, all the work on this book was done by members of the group. So all the mistakes, of course, are our fault as well. But we'll get around to a second edition if you buy enough of them, and we'll correct any copy editing errors. But I think we're in pretty good shape. On the subject of buying them, we will have some for sale today here at Prairie Lights. That's why I'm wearing my Christmas sweater. It's this subtle marketing ploy to say, well, Christmas is coming, maybe we can get them. I should add that our group took the decision, we'd like people, if possible, to buy from their local independent bookstores and to support them, especially Prairie Lights, which has been so helpful to us. And then we also agreed as a group, rather than fight among all of us about the division of profits and so on, any profits we get, if we ever get to that point, this year we would like to donate to City of Literature. So it's another way to do good. Buy this, buy it for your grandchildren, buy it for your everyone. So enough of that. Our program today, what we're going to do is we have, I think it's 13 readers. This might be a new record for Prairie Lights. Most of you should have an order of that. So we're just going to come up. People are reading excerpts of about 3 minutes from their pieces. And we're just going to go from there and move forward. And we'll see how it works. I think the logistics of this are going to work because we do still have in our group several members of the greatest generation who managed the logistics of World War II, so I expect we'll be able to handle getting back and forth to the podium. And so with no further ado, John Hudson will start us off and we'll keep going. Thank you.
I am John Hudson. I will read excerpts from Steam and Steel. As I walked from the bright sunshine of my 15th summer into the dim interior of the locomotive roundhouse, I could smell a wonderful mixture of oil, steam, and smoke, and hear the subtle sounds of steam locomotives resting. Faint hisses of steam issued unexpectedly from valves. From remote recesses within the steel beasts, I could hear panting breath, almost as if they were alive. Warmth surrounded me from the banked fires within their fireboxes. There was something beautiful and awe-inspiring about these seemingly inanimate beings, these iron horses of the rails, whether quiescent or rushing across the terrain, trailing cars of passengers or freight. These magnificent creatures drew me back time and again just to be in their presence. Excerpt 2. The hostler in the locomotive climbed down from his cab and asked if I wanted to ride with him as he took the engine out to the water tank. Did I ever? This was something to tell my family and friends about. It was 1945. And the men who drove the locomotives were cultural heroes, like sports stars or rock stars today. Every kid who saw a train go by would wave to the engineer or the fireman. In our contemporary world, it is difficult to imagine the lofty status these champions of steam and steel enjoyed when trains were everywhere and every day. 50 years later, I stood on this same spot, remembering what had once been. This was a major division point on the Great Northern Railroad, where once sprawled a massive rail yard, a roundhouse, repair shops, water tower, locomotives and rail cars. Now there was only an enormous level expanse of gravel. Nothing remained of the bustling activity of 50 years ago. The main line of the Burlington Northern nearby was the only reminder of what used to be here. The scene was empty and silent. The sagebrush growing down the slope to the powerful Columbia River. The brown hills looming nearby. Only the wind gently whispering, "Goodbye forever."
pleased to see so many people here. I'm not going to say that's attributable to my planning to read, but I'm pleased to see you even so. The title of my little piece that I was asked to read was, "What Kind of Lexicographer Am I Anyway?" Well, during the latter part of my career as a specialist in matters of the English language, can you hear me in the back row? Okay. I turned to lexicography because it doesn't involve a lot of intellectual heavy lifting. Of course, I'd much appreciate it if you did not quote me to any lexicographers you just might happen to know. They are good people and justly proud of their important work. After several years of giving papers at dictionary conferences, I was given a chance to produce a small dictionary of abbreviations for the American Heritage Dictionary series. I stopped after the first edition and suggested they do revisions for new editions in-house. The reason was that I would otherwise become a slave to the project. Every time I encountered an abbreviation I did not recall listing, I would need to boot up my computer to check. There were more interesting things to do. For example, I recently finished a biographical dictionary of noted Czechs and Czech Americans, contracted for by Iowa City's Penfield Books. Not long ago, I was asked to review a proposal for a third edition of the F word, a listing of all combinations of the F word with other words for which I was paid a small but adequate sum. But you ask, why Bob Watchell? Well, some years ago I presented a paper at a meeting of the Dictionary Society of North America on the subject of taboo words. I based the paper on a newspaper writer's claim that words dealing with body functions and body parts are becoming less tabooed, and words that are ethnic slurs are becoming more tabooed. However, he gave no evidence to support his assertion. So I began a hunt through dictionaries published during the 20th century to see how over time the strength of taboos might have changed. Essentially, I proved the right reporter's claim. Somehow, this paper got me categorized in the minds of folks in the dictionary publishing business as the dirty word lexicographer. So, when Oxford University Press wanted an outside opinion on whether they should do a third edition of the F word, they turned to me. I was very gratified to be asked, though I felt just a little bit sheepish about it. I was reminded of the time when a Canadian lexicographer tried to rope me into jointly authoring a paper claiming that dictionaries were anatomically incorrect concerning a part of the female body that I'm not allowed to specify here. I would specify in any case, it's the confusion between vulva and vagina, vulva being the exterior part, commonly referred to as the pussy, and vagina being the connecting part to the womb. I concluded that although from a strictly anatomical point of view he was correct, dictionaries were merely reflecting the common misuse of the term, as indeed they should. Thus I barely escaped becoming known as the V-word lexicographer. Sometimes specialization is not a good thing. Thank you very much. I'm glad you found it amusing. I like to amuse people.
You made a sale.
I'm Marilyn Holland, and I'm reading a brief excerpt from A Country School Teacher. Miss Work was a school teacher who lived across the street from us in North Liberty and taught in a country school north of town near the cemetery. It was 3 miles to school from her house, and since she didn't own a car, she walked both ways every day. The exception was the coldest part of the winter, when she would stay with a farm family near the school. It would allow her to get to school early to build a fire in the heating stove to warm the one room before the pupils arrived. I never saw her leave for school because of the early hour she would begin her trek, carrying a paper shopping bag with everything she thought she would need that day. Her school had grades primary through 8, and I believe she once told me she had 14 or 15 students each year. The school had no plumbing inside, but she always kept a bucket of water on a table in the room for drinking. She was a woman ahead of her time, with a theory how diseases were spread from one child to another. She did not think it was right that all the children should drink from the same dipper in the bucket. She decided that the way to take care of this problem was to get each child a glass of his or her own. Her meager pay didn't allow for her to buy these glasses, and it would have been unthinkable during the Depression to ask the parents to send a drinking glass with each of their children. So she set about to provide them herself. Cheese spreads were sold in grocery stores in small 4-ounce glasses with a colorful design on them. She began eating cheese spread on bread as her noon lunch until she had collected enough glasses, each with a different design, for her pupils. I remember her showing me the collection as it grew and how careful she was to keep track of the patterns on the glasses so she didn't repeat any. It became more and more difficult for her to find new patterns in the small-town grocery store in North Liberty, but she persisted. She kept them neatly lined up on her kitchen windowsill. I think I was excited as she was the day she finally had one glass for each student and took them to school to present to the students. Now all I can think of was how boring her lunches must have been month after month. With her sense of frugality, I'm sure those sandwiches had only a thin coating of cheese on the bread, so the spreads lasted a very long time. I can't help but think how different it is today in school. If the student needs to bring a supply to school, a note sent home to the parent usually accomplishes the goal.
Hi, I'm Gordon Strayer, and I will read you an excerpt from Death of a President. The date was April 12, 1945, when word reached our base camp in France, as it did to American servicemen in every theater of World War II, through Armed Forces Radio Network. This news just in: President Franklin Delano Roosevelt died today of a massive cerebral hemorrhage at his southern White House in Warm Springs, Georgia. The president, that was as much as I heard from the tiny, tinny radio in our 8-man hut, my ears and eyes and brain both having essentially shut down after the newscaster's first sentence. There was a total silence for a minute or more throughout the double row of canvas huts. Then the voices erupted. What the hell? They must have got it wrong. How could that be? Listen, guys, that's probably just Axis Sally with more Kraut propaganda. But subsequent newscasts left no doubt that our commander-in-chief was indeed dead. That fact did not bring universal grief to all our colleagues in uniform. Some of the older men among us uttered to the effect that they'd be damned if they felt sorry. After all, hadn't that guy with so-and-so with the funny accent got us into war in the first place? Or they said PWA, WPA. I'm sorry, I'm having a little problem here. They said that, my goodness. They said that he made a mockery, a funny guy with a mockery with the phony accent got us into war in the first place. Or the PWA projects made it impossible for lazy men to lean on their shovels most of the day and still get paid good money out of the taxpayers' pockets. Or they said now, maybe that'll keep that homely wife of his out of the coal mines. But what clearly seemed a majority of the 100 or so fellow members of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division of the Army of the United States, Roosevelt's death dealt a blow to the solar plexus. After all, FDR was the only president many of us and youngsters could really remember. Barely 5 months earlier, he had had my very first vote for any U.S. president cast back in Camp Crowder, Missouri, in complete defiance of the officer who had remarked while notarizing my absentee ballot envelope, "I hope you're not voting for that son of a bitch Roosevelt." Our base camp, located perhaps 50 kilometers east of Reims and the so-called Little Red Schoolhouse, where the armistice was signed, would be signed a month later, was strangely quiet the next several days. Even the intermittent poker games evoked a little noise, either of rejoicing or complaint from the players or spectators. We went about our business, foregoing the usual bitching and wisecracking. Came the day of Roosevelt's funeral, advanced details of which we had perused in our daily Stars and Stripes newspapers. Work was suspended throughout the camp late that afternoon. Men gathered in small, hushed groups out in the clearing between the rows of huts to listen to the broadcast of the services. A gentle snow was falling, big, wet flakes out of a depressingly gray sky. But there was no wind and no temperature was friendly to bareheaded men as we stood outdoors, most of us in our fatigues, but a few actually in dress uniform. The camp's few officers were not in evidence, presumably gathered in a hut to listen in more comfort. Except for the voices of music coming to us through the radio, silence prevailed as the service began and progressed. But men, including our handful of tough warriors, who had survived the Battle of the Bulge barely 100 days earlier, bowed and shook their heads sadly, and tears were clearly in evidence on the faces of many of these same and other grown men. None of us had known FDR, of course, nor had any more than a radio and newsreel acquaintance with our commander-in-chief. But he'd been very real to us, and his death right at that point, while we were thousands of miles from the U.S., and especially with victory in Europe so clearly in sight, seemed every bit as cruel as the artillery fire we were sure we could still hear occasionally when the wind blew from the east.
I just moved back here about 4 years ago after living almost all my adult life in New York City. And this is a little thing about first time I attended a county fair. Maybe it's just as well to have experienced a county fair for the first time at age 53. When you're older, contrary to popular belief, you get more curious, not less. Many of the livestock exhibitors at the fair were young folks, members of various 4-H or FFA chapters. I'd had the idea that raising livestock must be pretty uncomplicated work and not very interesting, but these kids seemed just as proud of their accomplishments as any football player or bandsman or debater, and no wonder. As I saw a couple of them in tears when their animals were eliminated from competition. Pigs apparently live a pig's life. It appeared that they knew that they were in hot, cramped, and stinky circumstances, and had decided that the best way to survive the experience would be to sleep through as much of it as they could. I've been told that swine are much more intelligent than they look, and this was the evidence. Goats are among the most sociable of animals. They seem to enjoy being petted like a dog or a cat, and they'll sniff your hand as a dog will, but then they'll want to chew on you. Being chewed by a goat doesn't hurt, their teeth aren't sharp enough, and they're never really earnest in their efforts. Horses are not as uniformly friendly as goats, but they always arouse my sympathies because most of them are dumber than bricks and probably don't understand that their entire purpose in life is to be hassled by humans. So if they're not friendly, it's no wonder. I'm pretty sure that the main reason why I get along with most horses is that I stroke them on the neck, which they seem to enjoy, and I don't let my hands get near their muzzles unless I'm offering food. Speaking of food, I wonder, are prize animals kept alive to compete at future fairs and to reproduce? Are the also-rans killed for food? Might I meet one of them at next year's fair in the form of a maid-right?
Hi, I'm Jean Liston, and I'm going to read an excerpt from Denise.
I admitted Denise to the gyne-oncology unit at Loyola Medical Center. She was scheduled for exploratory surgery the next morning. While getting her vital signs, I found out that she had been diagnosed with uterine cancer the previous year and had received over 20 radiation treatments at another hospital. Denise told me she was in her early 30s and a single parent of 3 small children. She was about 5'6" tall and quite thin, except for a protruding abdomen. She had lanky brown hair that hung to her shoulders and generally had the look of a person that life had not been kind to. She told me she had a boyfriend, but did not talk much about her personal life, and I never saw any visitors during her entire stay in the hospital. She was not a difficult or demanding woman, but watching what was happening to her body was very unnerving. Her abdominal incision did not heal and gradually opened. Her skin, fat, and abdominal covering seemed to rot away despite everything we did. Denise never appeared to be in pain and would watch as we cared for her incision. She would visit with us, but never ask any of us nurses about her condition or her prognosis. For years, Denise's condition and death haunted me. I'm sure many of the other nurses felt the same way. She was our age, and we knew something like this could happen to any of us. I always wondered how she could stand to watch us care for her gaping wound and what she was thinking during those times, watching her belly rot. Did she think the doctors were going to be able to fix it? Did she think she was going to get better and go home and care for her children? Or did she know what her fate was going to be? Had she accepted her death before she even came in the hospital? I'll never know. And if I was back there again, I wouldn't ask her.
No. I'm going to read a piece from The Girl with the Curl. My wife Darlene and I met in a general psychology course taught by Dr. O. Ray Bontrager at California State Teachers College in western Pennsylvania. We had our first date at the Stockdale Firemen's Hall, which sponsored a weekly Saturday night dance that drew teenagers from the many towns scattered along the Monongahela River Valley and the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania. When the dance ended, I asked if I could drive Darlene home. She said that'd be nice. Darlene told me that her home was in Allison, Pennsylvania, not too far from Brownsville. So I set off in that direction. I knew my way to Brownsville without any real problems, and we had a nice talk along the way. How did we like Doc Bontrager's class? What were we majoring in? What did we like to do for fun? What kind of music did we like, etc., etc. Once we got to Brownsville, Darlene said that I should follow Route 40, which locally there was known as the National Pike, toward Uniontown, Pennsylvania for a few miles. Then we would find the road to Allison, where she lived. Once we had turned off Route 40, we were on a narrow, winding road that meandered along, clinging to the hillsides, and then plunging rather unexpectedly into creek valley bottoms and across narrow bridges constructed by the WPA projects during the Depression era. Not only did the terrain appear more rugged and the valleys more desolate than many that I had traversed before, but as we continued along the road, the landscape grew darker and darker until finally, I swear, I thought we had passed beyond the edge of the lighted world. But just as I despaired of seeing another light and wondering what I had gotten myself into, the few lights of Allison appeared on the next ridge. Driving into Allison, Darlene directed me to her home. It was a small house sitting on a sloping lot at the right side of the road. She asked me to park near the steps leading up to the front porch, which was unlighted, as was the rest of the house. I got out of the car, went around and opened her door, and escorted her up the steps. No sign of life appeared until we reached the porch. As we walked up the last step, a form, that's all I could see, arose from the porch swing to my right, and a massive, bare-chested man stood looking directly at Darlene. "Where have you been?" he asked. "I went to the dance in Stockdale," Darlene responded. "How did you get there?" "With my girlfriends." "That's how you should have come home." By this time, he had opened the front door, ushered her through, and forcefully slammed the door without ever looking at or addressing me. I stood there on the dark porch and felt as if I didn't exist. It's a wonder I ever went back.
Hi, I'm Pat Davis, and I'm going to read a piece I wrote called Rest in Peace. Some time ago, Tom and I began seriously to consider dying. I don't mean that we planned to end our lives together. We just decided to call a local undertaker and discuss the motions of dying and what the family had to do. A certified pre-planner came to call. He asked lots of questions about our past careers, and would we consider a plan to pay up front so our boys would be free of the decisions that had to be made at the time of our separate exits from this world. The discussion took about an hour and would follow up with a letter. The problem is I cannot find the letter. I'm sure he would send a copy, but I'm going on my memory. First of all, dying is expensive. If Tom paid up front and used all the help provided by Lensings, he could die for about $7,000. That is, if he paid in full the next few months. I could die cheaper because I could pay in installments, so my exit would cost about $6,000. This, of course, is if we were to be cremated. In the meantime, I had been reading obituaries. Some seem to glory in the end of the person's life and make statements like, "The Lord came and took him to heaven," or "The Lord wrapped his arms around him or her and took them peacefully away." The phrase about the Lord wrapping his arms around grabs my interest. What do the Lord's hands look like? Does this depend on what the deceased worked at during his lifetime? Do they have that manicured look, like those of a surgeon or a well-heeled attorney? Or are the fingernails dotted with perpetual grease, like an auto mechanic? Are the Lord's arms encased in a silk shirt with long white sleeves? Or, depending on the deceased, a denim work shirt? I'm not really thinking that the Lord would be wearing a tank top or a strapless shirt for a female, but it could happen. I'm also amazed by the number of children, grandchildren, and sometimes great-grandchildren, all named individually. What if someone were left out of the naming? Last week, I read an obit that included naming the family dog. Is this going too far? What may seem a quiet exit from our world could be seen from the other side as a tug-of-war between Lucifer and Michael the Archangel, making lists of good and bad behavior to see where the spiritual remains would be sent. Could you envision a block of small bricks making a wall of nasty transgressions? Or a small pebble dropping into a calm pool to verify good deeds?
A friend of mine has no belief in the afterlife. She maintains that when you're dead, it's all black. I think that's too trivial. Most religions keep us hooked on bettering our lives to attain some measure of rewards. We have met those whose rewards we would cut short, as individuals who we maintain should burn in hell. This is the second one for my husband, my late husband, Tom. I'd like to add a little something to my story. My late husband, Tom Davis, was a member of the Gray Hawks with me since 1999, and a number of his pieces appear in Yesterdays. Tom often wrote about his experience as the director of the University of Iowa Marching Band, and he almost always ended his pieces with a limerick. I think one of those poems makes a good commentary on the matter that I've just been talking about to those who think we can outplan death. So in closing, let me read the following little limerick from Tom for Tom. Here's what I've come to understand. Things don't always go as planned. Go with your hunches, roll with the punches, and do your best to beat the band.
I'm Sandra Hudson, and I'm going to read excerpts from A Man of Contradictions. My father was a man of faith, but not religion. He strove to be a self-sustaining man, yet he wove around him a complex social network. He was a man of inquiry, who seldom judged. An innovator and inventor with little interest in implementation. A man of influence who shunned power. A man of keen intelligence and well-organized mind who lived in clutter. In short, he was a man of contradictions. It's easier to capture a beat of Mercury than to catch the essence of my father. If you knew him, or even knew of him, it's almost certain you have a story or two to tell about Ted Chermak. He was a sort of folk character. Ted sits at the only truly clear place in the room, a large lime oak, gray 1950s dining table. He swirls his spoon around his coffee mug, creating a chiming sound. This is his temple, and he's signaling that he's prepared to give you an audience. Pull up a chair, he invites. I should warn you, once you're a chair at his table, you are his for life. It starts out innocently enough with a question. For the natives, it's, how's it going? For a visitor like you, it's, how was your trip up? The focus is always on the person in the chair. Ted's questions are genuine. He truly wants to hear your ideas. He looks for the merit in them. He plays with them. He expands on them. Once he carries you into the realm of ideas, you are bound to him, similar to the way Mercury binds to create an amalgam. He is a master of helping you to expand your personal universe. Ted midwives ideas, your ideas, coaxing them, guiding them into existence, and then he hands them back to you as your very own. That's his charisma.
I'm Don Ross, and I'm going to read an abridged version of my memoir, What About Me? I began my elementary school days in Clemens, Iowa at the age of 6. I was very thin, wore glasses, and not at all athletic. These all branded me as the sissy of the class. I was constantly harassed by my male classmates, as well as the boys in the upper grades. No matter which grade I was in, it was the same. Hey, skinny, or hey, four eyes, or hey, sissy, or there goes the teacher's pet. It was always pick on Ross at school or on the bus ride home. When I reached high school, some of the nasty names that I did not list here were dropped. But Skinny held on, and a new name popped up among some of the parents of my classmates, which was the professor. One father even suggested to the athletic coach that I should be awarded a letter since I always helped the athletes with their homework and kept them eligible to play. I had friends on an individual basis or at Sunday school and church. Some of those friends would come to my home and play or invite me to their home, but would revert to the teasing and harassing when together with the other guys. During my married life, I've returned 3 times to the class reunion. The first time was the 100th anniversary of the founding of the town. The second was my 40th reunion, and the last was the 50th reunion. I will not be attending anymore. The 40th and 50th reunions were comfortable and friendly, but I found our interests are so different that we have no relationship to discuss. After telling about families and what we do now in retirement and our health, all talk goes back to the school days and what was funny. What is funny to a lot of them is a painful remembrance to me, and I don't need that. So, to the class of 1954, farewell to you. I left you and conquered new fields and see no reason to return.
Hi, I'm Janet Trimble. I'm reading excerpts from my late husband O.C. Trimble's story called Broken Antenna in Windstorm. One of my favorite workout routes in Iowa City included the Riverwalk past Old University Art Museum and the outdoor displays of modern sculpture made of all types of things like stone, pipes, cable, chain, or gears. And some of these creations were a bit of a stretch. At this time, my sons Mark and Matt had started a one-horse construction company for their summer job. They and their friends worked late one Saturday, and when they finished, it was past closing time for the landfill. They needed their truck for some Sunday plans they had. What were they to do with that 30-foot triangular-shaped TV antenna, a large tractor wheel rim, or other pieces of junk too large for the dumpsters? They came home stumped. Being a helpful father, I suggested, be a group of artists. Oh yeah, those were good boys. Down by the art museum, they dug a foundation for the sculpture. They dumped the dirt over the riverbank to get rid of signs of their prank. Some of them mixed concrete on the truck in our driveway and then drove to the museum parking lot. They moved the concrete by wheelbarrow to fill the sculpture's base. Several boys spent hours bending materials, working out how the sculpture would look. The finished production used the antenna, neatly bent to a 30-degree angle, with a log chain attached, holding a rusty tractor wheel rim that swung back and forth from it, a blinking traffic signal, and various other pieces of junk completed this work of art. Matt stamped a title on a piece of polished brass he mounted on the base: Broken Antenna in windstorm. It really looked professional. They were amazed that it wasn't all ripped out the next day. School started a month later. Fall, winter passed. The following 4th of July, broken antenna in windstorm was still on display. We saluted the creators every time we ran that riverside route. Before I sit down, Trimble, I want to thank the writers that put this book together. You did a fabulous job. Thanks.
I'm David Jepson. I'm reading from excerpts from my memoir, A Lesson from Losing. I scramble out of the old Hudson, toting glove and softball bat, and race for the ball field. This is the day. After years of watching softball games in town, this is my chance at age 8 to play in a real game between two country schools. Teams made up of girls and boys who live on farms within contiguous 2-mile square areas. Our teacher, Miss Flanagan, arranged for our school, Pittsford number 1, to play the game at Benezet number 5, the school 2 miles north. The ball field is, really, a mown wheat field with 4 bare dirt patches arranged in a diamond, with another patch in the middle for the pitcher. Miss Flanagan's defensive strategy is to play our biggest players in the field to stop balls from rolling to the road. The Benezet strategy is simple. Send the best player out to pitch. The pitcher is pale, tall, and willowy, dressed in a loose-fitting shirt, jeans, and work shoes. As we soon learned, she throws the ball hard, hits the ball far, and runs faster than anyone on the field. But she looks as old as Miss Flanagan, and later we are told that she is 16 and working to finish the 8th grade. About an hour later, Miss Flanagan calls us together and we pile back in the cars. Her lower lip is quivering, a sure sign she is upset. I am disappointed and a bit humiliated. I struck out, and after Miss Flanagan asked their pitcher to slow her pitches, hit a weak ground ball. The Benezet pitcher batted 3 times, and each time she rounded all the bases, running like a girl, with arms stiff at her side. In all my fantasies, I had not reckoned with a player like her. I learned a lot in 4th grade. The smallest continent is not Antarctica. Starting with the last pages of a mystery spoils the read. Don't trust memory on 14 times 14. When writing, always choose a pencil with a good eraser. And talent beats gender.
Thanks. I did bring the reading glasses. I'm Mildred Lavin. It's, a lot of you know me. Why was it that they never let me fix things when I was a girl? My brother learned to fix things from our dad. Dad showed my only brother how to use hand tools when he was still just a kid. I remember looking at my hands, wondering, were they any different from my brother's hands? We were so close in age that our hands were actually the same size. We both took piano lessons and played with just about the same skill at our recitals.
But hand tools for fixing was only for males. In public school, manual arts or shop was the course for boys. Home economics, that was cooking, was only for girls. I never questioned this sex stereotyping until decades later. Came marriage, and still my husband was the appointed one to fix with fixing tools, but he was a man who said he wanted a partner wife. To my surprise, he wanted me to know how to work with the hand tools as he did. The tools in his hands simply sang. Never a mistake, never a wound from mishandling. He loved fixing stuff and building things, and I was terribly proud of him. And he taught me well. Already in my middle years, I had more to learn about other fixings. Here in Iowa, I heard the term fix a meal, as in, what should I fix for supper? First time I heard it, I thought, what's wrong? That needs fixing. No, that was just preparing or making a meal, as we big city folks called it. Here, I also learned about pet animals getting fixed. This needed some explaining. Then there was intention, as in, I'm fixing to take a nap now, and are you fixing to argue with me? These were all new to me. First time I heard, I'll fix his clock, I asked, what was wrong with it? But when they told me, she's got herself in a fine fix now, shaking their heads negatively, looking gloomy, I understood that one without further explanations.
And so we come almost to the end. These pieces you've heard are excerpted. Usually we have 9 minutes to read in our group. Some people may take less, but so they don't. They've worked very well, but they're a little shorter. And just to give you a taste of what a longer piece is like, I'm going to read a full piece. This was written in 2008. The group in December of 2007 said, why don't we all write a piece about being a Gray Hawk, and we'll come and read them next time. And I took this seriously and came back the next time and wrote this piece on the first anniversary. And I was the only one who took the assignment, so just goes to show. But let me share it with you as a way of closing today. It's called On Becoming a Gray Hawk, with a little epigraph from Dylan Thomas that goes, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. I have a photograph of my first child taken in Ghana in 1973, not long after he learned to walk. He stands in front of a cake made in the shape of a teddy bear. There's a single tall candle sticking up from the center of the cake, borrowed from the packet of candles that we kept in the storeroom as insurance against the frequent power outages that we experienced. It was his first birthday, and he was about to learn that he could receive claps and cheers if he blew out the candle. In the night, he would have to learn a second lesson, that blowing out exactly the same kind of candle, but not on a birthday cake, would plunge the house into darkness and elicit groans of, "Oh no!" with no claps and cheers. This first birthday metaphor applies to me this month, January of 2008. A year ago, I joined the Gray Hawk Memoir Writers group in Iowa City. Those who welcomed me to join them must look at me as the kid, just past 60, sporting a belly still with capon lined, carrying literary ambitions. I must make them look at me from time to time, shake their heads and say, "So much to learn." As I was with my son when he turned 1, they are to me, infallibly kind, humoring my efforts to earn a clap or a few cheers, and understanding and polite about the flickering of the light when I blow on the wrong candle in the descending night. Members who formed the group share history and special bonds. In the course of 9 years, yielding to the writer's impulse, they have shared with one another thoughts and experiences that they might otherwise have carried in silence to the grave. Memories of joys from some long ago time, or of the still fresh hurt of a bruise that everyone else has forgotten. I can imagine what their interactions were like in the early days of the group. From my observations of my friend McNulty, who joined the group soon after I did. I've known him for almost 30 years, and many times watched him in his capacity as a geography professor stand before crowds of hundreds and hold forth with all the panache of the Irish storyteller. How surprised I was then, the first day he read to the Greyhawks, to hear his voice quaver. Talking about the geography of the world is something different and requires less courage, I think, than those first steps to reveal before others the geography of one's soul and the stories of one's family. A few have left the group permanently. Those who I never knew are the ones who made room for me. A few others come less and less often as the challenge of getting out and about becomes more onerous with age. They grow more thin and fragile. The way I remember my father changed at 75, his step growing more tentative, and the suits he had worn all his life suddenly grown too large. Others come religiously. Always, at least some of the stories are very good, and there's never predicting whose reading will make a particular day memorable. One day, Dawn seems lost in a pedestrian list, then appears another day and soars with a story that cuts to the quick of human relationships and cruelties of youth. Bob, reveling in his reputation as curmudgeon, proves in this company to be a gentle giant of laughter and good cheer. Tom struggles in the aftermath of a stroke, fortunate in the assistance of his wife, Pat, to share with us the words and wit and limericks that but for this effort would remain locked up inside. The two of them make the rest of us feel blessed by their devotions. Osi, a man whose life one senses has been full of friendships, writes in longhand on his yellow legal pads, still harvesting and sharing with us the pleasures of a life of merry mischief. Hal can bring to life on a quiet Iowa afternoon the feelings and confusions of going to war almost 65 years before, and make us understand what those words, the greatest generation, mean. Sandra and John are not shy about their 50-year love affair as they continue to dance through life, and sometimes on the page. Gordon, with Christmas approaching, brings back the magic of Santa's presence in his youth. And Marilyn takes us back to the candy store of all our youths, the marvelous struggles to choose what one's penny should buy, as an Iowa city, long disappeared, suddenly comes to life again. And then Mildred, who reads marvelous narratives that make us wistful for the goodness and zest she brought to her sweet life, one day reads us a letter she wrote 70 years ago when she was only 12. The voice we hear in the girl of that time and the voice of the woman at the table with us every other Thursday afternoon sound exactly the same, unchanged by time. Sam Becker, who issued the challenge for the formation of this group and was for a long time a regular member, has only come twice since I joined. Once he came to read a piece about his wife and her response to the birth of a child needing special care. He paid tribute to her special character and the differences she made not only in the life of that child, but to the life of her entire community by her responses to that challenge. The second time he came was the week that his ailing wife had died. He didn't read that week. He just came to be with friends, I think, this special group of friends that he knew would understand exactly how he was feeling. How fortunate I feel to have been invited to become a part of this very special group of people, to participate every other Thursday in their continuing education class as I take lessons in how to go gently, fully conscious, and with grace into that good night. Thank you.